Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second part of our training on the Equitable Development Data Explorer. If you didn't join us for the first part, I would definitely recommend it. I went through the background and sort of a little bit of understanding of why we are even doing this, why we have this tool. And I'll introduce myself again. My name is Alex. I am the senior political organizer at EDDE. And Abdul, you can introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abdul Razak Zachariah, and I'm a graduate intern at EDDE.
Thanks. Sorry for that. So today, this is going to be our second module of this training series. And we're going to be going over just the basics from when you log on to the website of the Equitable Development Data Tool. What does it look like? What do we see? And sort of what does that mean? We will be going over the interface, pointing out some of the non-map pages like the data dictionary, moving between the different views, the neighborhood, the borough, and the city view. And then just a quick reminder or a quick note about if there are problems, issues, or you want to see something change, who do you send that information to? So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I am going to hand it over to Abdul, who's going to walk us through the actual tool itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. So before we jump into it, once again, if you have not watched the previous module, we'll suggest going back to know a bit more about the background of the Equitable Development Data Explorer. But some basic information about it that we cover more detail in the previous module is that it came out of a lot of the work that came from the Racial Impact Study Coalition and the legislation known as Local Law 78, which allowed for the creation of the Equitable Development Data Explorer, or the EDDE for short, as well as the creation of the displacement risk map that is included in the EDDE, and the requirement of things called racial impact reports that are submitted by developers for land use and rezoning applications. Our hope in doing this training is to make sure that you get a better understanding of how to use the EDDE and what important information it provides, and make sure that you are able to advocate for your own community priorities and standards, and just understand who's in your neighborhood, community district, or borough, who defines it, who lives there, who has been living there, who is at risk of being pushed out, and how you can kind of do your best to support the folks who are in your area. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen so we're able to start looking at the EDDE and just look around what the page is like and get an understanding of what information you can get from using it. So the first thing you want to do of anything else is find the EDDE. Aside from Googling the EDDE, you can go find it at equitableexplorer.planninglabs.nyc. When you're on the EDDE, it'll show this map view as your first part, as the first page of the landing page. What you'll see is this kind of side left pane that gives basic instructions on how to go about using the map. And you'll see a map view on the right side. The map view contains two different layers of information that we'll get into more detail on. There's the community data view, which you can see at the top left here, and there's the displacement risk map view. The main thing that you want to understand about the EDDE is that since it's a map view type of tool, it's something that you want to be able to look at with a geographic sense. So you want to be able to know what community, what space you're looking for, and the information that's provided, all of the specific data, is based off of the area that you click on and the areas that you're trying to get more information about. Before we jump into the specific pages that are available on the EDDE website, we're just going to do a basic overview of how to go about using the map view that's here on the right. So the first thing that you'll see on the top left here are a few buttons. If you wanted to zoom in and out of the map, you would do just kind of like if you're on Google Maps, you would press the plus to zoom in, the minus to zoom out. If you're using a mouse, then you can scroll your wheel up and down and it'll zoom you in and out. And if you're using a trackpad on a laptop, you can pinch in and out as well to have the same functionality. If you want to move around the map a little bit, then you would go onto the map and you would just click and hold and then be able to move the map to wherever area that you want to look at. So right now I'm looking at Manhattan. If I wanted to look closer to Queens and Brooklyn, then I can just grab it and move it that way. And if for some reason you're using the map and your view gets skewed in one way or another, the map is pretty convenient in that it doesn't really change beyond this 2D view of it where you can scroll up and down. But if for some reason it goes sideways or it gets into some weird like 3D version of itself, then you can click this button here known as Reset North, and it would set it back to this original view that we have that's available to us. So what we want to see now is what the different views look like within the map view. As I mentioned, there's the community data view and the displacement risk map view. When you open the Equitable Development Data Explorer page, you're immediately on the community data view at the community district level. So you don't have to click anything to get to this level. This is what it's going to be like when you get there. If you wanted to look at the displacement risk map, then you just click the other button that's right next to it, and it'll switch the view, not so much switching the map itself, but switching what the different geographic levels are on the map and changing into a map that has a legend with different colors that help you identify the different geographies and specific information about them. We have a whole separate set of modules, one for the community data view and one for the displacement risk map view and what their data is representing and what the geography levels are. So we won't jump into that, but it's good to know that the two map views give you different sets of information, and they're both information that's really helpful in understanding the population, the housing situations, and other kinds of characteristics that make a neighborhood or community the way that it is. I'll jump back to the community data view real quick because there's more specific information that you can get from there. As I said, when you get to the first page of the EDDE, you'll see the community data view and it'll be on the community districts level. If you click on borough, then you'll switch to a view where instead of having all of the community districts outlined, you'll have specific boroughs outlined, as you can see here with Staten Island, with Brooklyn, with Queens, and with Manhattan and the Bronx above that. And so this allows you to get data specific to borough levels as opposed to the smaller geographies of the community district. And then if you click on citywide, then you'll be able to look at data for the entirety of New York City, which is really helpful if you want to understand and compare information between these three levels. That's something that we'll do when we get further into the practice of these different tools. So now that we've looked a little bit at the map page and got an understanding of how that works, we'll jump over to see what some of the informational pages of the EDDE include and what they tell us about this tool. So we'll go to the About page here. The About page is a space where you're able to get information on all of the different map levels or map layers that are available and get a little bit of background of what the Departments of City Planning and Housing Preservation and Development wanted to include in the EDDE in the first place. So as you can see, there's some background on community data and displacement risk map levels. There's also information on the racial equity reports, which we'll have a separate training module available later on for us to dive more into what information is involved in those reports. And then there's some brief description of the methods and sources, bibliography, and data dictionary for this tool. Briefly, the data dictionary, which you'll see a link for both here and in the methods and sources page, is a document that gives you a little bit of an overview or brief description of some of the key terms and data points that are brought up in the tool. So if you're not sure exactly what a specific term means or what a piece of data is trying to tell you, the data dictionary might give a quick overview of that, though we also suggest checking out other tools, including some that we have on NHG's website, to have a better understanding of certain ideas related to housing and characteristics that the tool provides. The next page that we're going to look at is the methods and sources page. The methods and data sources page, as it says here, tells us more about what the Local Law 78 legislation required the Departments of City Planning and Housing Preservation and Development to include as data in the EDDE, and then how those teams went about picking the methods for putting that data into this tool. We won't go too deeply into the methodology here. There'll be a separate module that we talk more about what the data's details include. But in large part, what we want to understand is that the departments and the folks who organized to make this happen were really thoughtful in deciding what data needs to be shown for us to understand both housing and displacement issues and conditions that are occurring within our neighborhoods. And so when you go into this space, even if you're someone who doesn't use data a lot, it's good to skim it to understand what were the broad topics that they thought were worth including. And it's something that's also worth looking at if you feel like there's other topics that you would want included, which then you'd be able to communicate to the folks who work on the EDDE, since this is a tool that is consistently going to be updated and changed towards how community members need to use it. There's also information here on the different scales that are used within the EDDE and where they get those kind of border lines from, which are largely from the US Census, and information on the reliability of the data, which is something that for folks who work in statistical data analysis and work may be very interested in looking at. And then the last page or piece of the EDDE website that we want to cover is the contact page. I won't click on it because what it does is open up a pop-up box. And what that pop-up box is your local email software or browser tool will open up with an email generated draft started for you that says EDDE question or comments in the subject line. And it will be sending an email to eddy@planning.nyc.gov. I'll jump back real quick to the About page and scroll up to the top, where you'll see that that same email address is provided here under the header that says feedback. This email address is for any user to be able to submit their issues, concerns, questions, thoughts to the team that's developing and maintaining the EDDE to make sure that's reflective of all of its users' needs. Since this is such a new tool, and since it's a tool that is rare in its representation of racial impacts, its representations of housing conditions by race, and looking at all of this information across very different scales, we think it's very important for the folks who are most locally impacted by what this information is trying to represent to be able to tell the EDDE team what they can do to better represent their communities and better say a more accurate story about what's going on in particular neighborhoods. So if you are going through it, everything down from clicking on one of these geographies, looking at the data, trying to email someone, anything that happens, and if it doesn't work out well, then send a message out to EDDE. They have a team that's ready to work on that and receive that information, and it makes the tool much better for community members who want to use it, for the developers who are applying to have land use changes, and for community groups that also want to apply to have some kind of land use change in their area. But at most, it's a tool that's for the community, and sending messages allows it to stay that way. So now that we've moved through each part of the website, the next thing that we'll do is spend some time actually exploring how to use the tool. So the next module that you'll look at, module 3, will be us looking at a specific community district. If you looked at module 1, or if you looked at module 1 and module 2, you will know that it's much easier to look at this information at a local level. So we're going to look at the example of Jackson Heights in North Corona in Queens as a community district. And we'll use that as an example to see what information about the population is there, what information about the housing market and conditions are there, and what that tells us about the story and situation that's occurring there for housing and displacement risk. All right, we'll see you in module 3.